Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. Let's start with some good news and some bad news. And the good news first. So the good news is that there has never been a better time to be alive if what you want is to be alive. Which is to say that after being really flat for 30,000 years, human lifespan has increased dramatically in the last century. In the year 1900, as Americans, we lived on average to be about 50 years old. And today we will live on average to be 80. And that's really good news. We are living longer because there's better health care, there's vaccines, there's clean water, there's good nutrition. So that's the good news. So what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is over the same period of time, the death rate has remained remarkably stable at exactly 100%. So that's bad. We all live longer, but we're all going to die. But you knew that already. That's not news. What is hidden in here, and I think the challenge that's really the difficult news here, is that we will live longer, but we are likely to live longer with serious illness. Most people for years, sometimes for decades. Serious illness like cancer, heart failure, dementia, ALS, Parkinson's disease, emphysema. These are the kinds of illnesses that we now live with as we live longer. And that creates challenges for us as individuals, as loved ones. How do we live well in the face of serious illness and really what is, in many ways, an affront to life and to the way we want to live it? And my message to you is that there are many things that we can do to live well in the face of serious illness, and to see that period of time as a time where we can live well and still have a very fulfilling and full life. If we plan for it and think about it. So the way bad news happens, often the way it happens is it's like you're on a plane and you're flying at 36,000 feet and you're watching the movie and you have a drink in your hand and things are fine. And then all of a sudden the plane drops 10,000 feet and there's an engine on fire. And that's how it feels when the doctor says you have cancer, you have heart failure, you have Parkinson's disease, dementia. And you think that the plane is going to crash in that moment. And while it feels that way, it's important to recognize that there's often a lot that we can do to change that. Now, to be clear, you can get control of the plane. You can get it to fly smoothly again. Now, we may not be going to the same place anymore. You're probably not sitting in the back of the plane just relaxing. You probably have to become a co-pilot on the plane. The destination may be different. The flight may not be as long. But we can still get control and fly smoothly and still have control over what's going on. The challenge, of course, is that in our society, there are myths that we have, understandings, ways of thinking about illness that actually get in the way of getting good care and of living well with serious illness. And what I want to do today is really focus on 3 of those myths and share with you what the myth is and what the truth is behind the myth, and some ways in which we, by understanding what's really true in the face of serious illness, we can make sure that each of us gets good care and that our family members, our loved ones, also get good care in the face of serious illness. So let's start with the first one. And the first myth is that you somehow have to choose between quality and quantity of life. And you may hear this in different ways. And the idea here is if what is important to you is quantity of life, living long, then you have to accept all the treatments that the doctors offer. You have to take chemotherapy, you have to agree to be in the ICU, to start dialysis, to have surgery. That's the path to a long life, to quantity. Or you can choose quality of life. And if you want to focus on your quality of life, well, that means that you say no to those interventions, you say no to those things, but you won't live as long. And that's the choice that you're often given. It's like all or none, which one do you choose? And the truth is that you can have both. You don't have to choose between. You can have both. And this choice that we are given is a false choice. Now, how can you have both? Well, one way to have both is to make sure that your loved one receives palliative care. Palliative care is a field of medicine that can help people achieve both. So let me just start here by defining palliative care. And let me just see a show of hands. How many people have heard of the word before and feel like they're familiar with it? Oh, that's great. Okay, maybe that's why you're here. But Let me share with you the definition that I like, the one that I use. It's simple, it's short, it's to the point, and really gets to the essence of it. And it says that palliative care is medical care focused on improving quality of life for people with serious illness. So what do we mean by serious illness? Well, I talked about that already: cancer and Parkinson's disease, a stroke, heart failure, emphysema, dementia. These are serious illnesses. These are illnesses that we live with for years or decades. The focus then is, how can you have the best possible quality of life while living with this serious illness? And that's the focus of palliative care, on how you can feel well, how your symptoms can be controlled, pain and shortness of breath and fatigue, helping make good decisions about your care. Should I choose that treatment or not? It's not to say the treatments are good or bad, but which one should I choose? Will this one help me achieve my goals or not? And also providing support. Palliative care is provided by a team. We work together, nurses, social workers, chaplains, physicians, on a team together to really address all the issues that matter in the face of serious illness. Abraham Lincoln said, "It's not the years in your life, but the life in your years that matters." And that is the focus of care. And what we know is that when you get palliative care in the face of serious illness, you can live better and longer. And let me just share with you one study. I'm not going to talk a lot about medical studies, but I think there's one you should be aware of. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a very prestigious medical journal, published in 2010, so it's now over 7 years old, by one of my friends and colleagues, Jennifer Temmel, who's at Massachusetts General Hospital. And this is the study. They enrolled 151 people who had a new diagnosis of metastatic lung cancer. So what does that mean? It means that the lung cancer has spread outside of the lung to the point that it's actually not curable. So metastatic means outside of its site of origin. On average, people with this illness live about 9 months with chemotherapy. And in this study, everyone with this illness who was invited to participate in the study got standard chemotherapy at Massachusetts General Hospital, at Harvard, which is apparently pretty good. I like to say it's not UCSF, but is apparently nonetheless pretty good care. Now, half of these people were then randomly assigned to receive palliative care in addition to whatever cancer treatment they were getting. What did they find? Well, the people who received palliative care in addition, they had less pain, they had less shortness of breath, they had a better quality of life, they were more satisfied with their care, they were less likely to end up in an ICU or to have a CPR near the end of life, and they lived longer by 3 months. In a disease where the average person lives for 9 months, people on average who receive palliative care in addition lived for a year, 3 months longer, as good or better than chemotherapy. Other studies of palliative care have shown similar findings. Not in all studies, you don't see that people live longer, but there has never been a study of palliative care that has shown that people live less long for having received palliative care. And the other benefit we see in many palliative care studies is not only is it good for the person who receives the care with the serious illness, it's good for their loved ones as well. So several studies of palliative care have shown, and hospice shows this as well, that your spouse is less likely to die or to develop depression after you die if you received palliative care. It's not only good for you, it's actually good for your loved ones as well. And if you think about it, there's not a lot of medical treatments that are both good for the person who gets the treatment and good for their loved ones. Right? If you treat your diabetes, hopefully your care will be better, your life will be better, but it doesn't make your loved ones' care better. In fact, the only thing I can think of easily is smoking cessation. Right? So if you quit smoking, if you smoke and you quit smoking, your loved ones will have better health. So smoking cessation and palliative care are the two things that really help your loved ones a lot. And so if we can provide that care, if we can get that kind of care, we can live better and we can live longer. So what does that look like? It looks like this. This is a graph representation of what it looks like to receive palliative care. And the key point here, if you look, is that if you go to time 0 on the bottom left here, what you notice is that while most of the focus is on cure, there's still a role for palliative care even at the moment of diagnosis. Even when that plane drops 10,000 feet and the engine is on fire, there's a role for palliative care because that's what people are thinking about in that moment. Let me give you an example. Sam was one of my patients in my practice. He was 89 years old. He lived here in San Francisco in a row house. He was a retired high school biology teacher. He and his wife, who was 92 at the time, would go dancing twice a week. Sam would drive to the dance hall. One morning, Sam woke up and he had terrible pain in his right hip. Couldn't walk, couldn't get out of bed. His wife called me. I said, just bring him to the ER. Maybe he had a fracture. I don't know. So they brought Sam to the ER. And they did an x-ray, and he did not have a fracture. So they did a CT scan thinking, well, maybe there's a small fracture we missed. So they did a CT scan, no fracture in the hip. But in order to get the x-ray right, they have to take a few pictures above the hip and below the hip, and they got a few images of his liver. And in his liver, unsuspected, were 2 masses that were worrisome for cancer. So they set him up for a biopsy. Sure enough, it showed that he had colon cancer that had spread to the liver. Now, Sam's hip pain got better. He went home. He was back dancing. He and his wife and his daughter came to my office, and I had to share this really bad news. I said, Sam, I'm really sorry to have to share this with you, but the biopsy shows that you have cancer, colon cancer that spread to the liver. And immediately, Sam had 2 questions for me. Can you imagine what he asked? How long do I have? Am I going to die? Right there in that moment, that's what he was thinking about. How long am I going to die? And I would submit to you that we were doing palliative care right from the beginning. Those were the questions he had. He also asked, what are you going to do about this? What can we do about this cancer? I did refer him to an oncologist. Sam did get chemotherapy. So you can see here that sometimes there's more focus on cure. You get the chemotherapy. Unfortunately for Sam, it made him very sick. We had to focus more on his comfort and how we could help him feel better because the chemotherapy made him sick. And what this shows us is that over time, as people get sicker through the illness, palliative care will play a larger role, either because people will say, you know what, I'm done. I do not want to come back to the hospital. I don't want to be in the ICU. I don't want more chemotherapy. I don't want another operation. Or sometimes those are not available. We do run out of treatments for the illness that might really make it better. And we have to deal with that as well. I have a line here that shows us about hospice. I just want to recommend hospice. 45% of Americans who die every year make use of hospice. 15% of Americans who enroll in hospice graduate from hospice, which means they stabilize or get better. It does require a 6-month prognosis to enter hospice. But over half of patients receive hospice services for 18 days or less, very late in the illness. And what I typically hear from people is, I wish I had gotten hospice sooner. So don't wait. That's my message about hospice. Don't wait. If you stabilize and get better, you can graduate. That's a good thing. We'd have more graduations if we had people in sooner. And then the green part is just to remind us all about bereavement and the experience that we have in bereavement. And while our healthcare system doesn't always focus on it, we have to remember that. And I show the tail there at the end to remind us that while the acute pain of loss does get better, generally over 6 months, we never forget the loss of someone who's important to us. And you'll hear people say, oh, don't worry, you'll get over it. But we all know that's not true. We always miss the people who matter to us, and it's something that is always a part of us. What I say when I see patients in the hospital or in my clinic, what I say is, my goal is to help you live as well as possible for as long as possible. That is the goal of palliative care. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, we could argue that all treatments for serious illness are that way. But really, this focus on living as well as possible and how treatments will help you live well is really important. Now, there's one other thing that happens that gets in the way of this care, and something that doctors and nurses will sometimes say. And I just want to share this with you so that you don't fall in the trap of answering this question. And you might have heard this question before. It's pretty commonly said in hospitals and the ER, where someone will say, would you like us to do everything possible? That's what the doctor said. Would you like us to do everything possible? To which the answer is, sure, right, of course. I mean, can you imagine you bring your mom to the emergency room and the doctor says, would you like us to do everything possible? You say, well, for my mom, half. would be plenty. You know, she really wouldn't want everything. She's kind of a quitter anyway. Right? Nobody's mom is a quitter. It doesn't exist. And so it's a terrible question. And what I teach my students and my trainees is do not ask that question. We can't ask, first of all, we can't ask a question where there's only one answer, where the answer may not be the right answer, number one. Number two, we're really miscommunicating. Because when we say, as doctors and nurses, would you like everything possible? That is what we mean. We mean everything possible. Now, if you come to UCSF Medical Center, that's a crazy amount of stuff that we can do. We can put you in the intensive care unit. We can put you on a ventilator. We can give you dialysis. We can operate. We can do transplants. Right? There's a whole array of things. And when we say everything possible, we mean that. Do you want everything possible? But my experience is that for most people, that's not what they think. They think, yeah, everything possible that will help. And so we're just not communicating the same way. So if you ever get asked that question, don't answer it. It's better to say, let me tell you how I was hoping you could help. What I teach my students is to say to the patient, to the family, how are you hoping we could help? But I would encourage you to say, this is how I'd like you to help, or how I was hoping you could help. So we were taking care of a woman. She was 92 years old. She had ovarian cancer that had spread in her whole body. She was home with hospice services, living with her family here in San Francisco, Chinese family. One morning, the family came in to see her, and there she was, and she was clearly sicker, and she was dying. She was breathing very slowly. She was moaning quietly. And the family got nervous. They sort of panicked in the moment, and they called 911 instead of calling hospice, which is what you're supposed to do. But that's okay. But the paramedics came, and they whisked her off, and she came to the UCSF emergency room. And the doctor there said, would you like us to do everything possible? And the family, of course, said, yes. So they called the ICU team. They called the medicine doctors. They were coming to admit her to the ICU because her blood pressure was low and she wasn't breathing well, probably had an infection. Well, she was dying. One of my colleagues, Steve McPhee, was on call that day. He got the call at the same time, heard the story, ran down to the emergency room. And before the ICU team got there, he pulled the family aside and he said, your mom is very sick. Yes, we know. How are you hoping we could help? And they held up a shopping bag and said, we brought new clothes because we need to dress her in new clothes for her journey to the next life. And he said, well, that's really important. And if that's because that's important, we should do that right here in the emergency room. And she's very uncomfortable right now. We'd like to give her some medicine to make her breathing easier. Yes, thank you. And why don't we move her upstairs to a quiet room, get her out of the ER, and all of you can be with her. Yes, thank you. And then the ICU team came rushing down, and he said, you know what? We're okay. And they went back to do their work. The family dressed her in new clothes. She got a little bit of morphine for her shortness of breath, and it really eased it a lot. We transferred her upstairs into one of our comfort care suites where families can be with their loved ones. She died 4 hours later, surrounded by her family. She was this close to ending up in our ICU on a lot of machines that she didn't want, that her family didn't want, because we miscommunicated. Now, that's not to say that it's the family's responsibility or your responsibility, but we have a partnership in healthcare. And so we have to be aware that sometimes the communication doesn't go as clearly as we want. And if we can take control and really understand better, we can see that certainly in that moment it wasn't going to help her be better and wasn't consistent with her goals. How were you hoping we could help? Let me tell you, this is how I was hoping you could help. That's the answer. So we can get quality and quantity of life, live well and live long by getting palliative care. So what's the next myth? Well, the next myth is that talking about what's really going on is going to destroy hope. That if we really talk about how seriously ill someone is, what's really happening, what the prognosis is, that people will lose hope. And I hear this. Don't tell my mom. Don't tell my mom she has cancer. She won't be able to take it. And I think for the last 3 years, she's been coming to the UCSF Cancer Center. And the letters are about 4 feet high on the outside of the building. And she reads. So what does she think is going on? Is she the only person in the cancer center without cancer? She knows. People say, don't tell him how sick he is. And I think, when you're that sick, people are really nice to you. And they come and visit you from all over the world. And when they come to talk to you, they cry because they're very sad. That happens when you're seriously ill. People figure it out. And if we don't talk about it, we are isolated by ourselves if we don't know how to talk about it. And my experience is that it doesn't take away hope, that really talking about hope and what we hope for encourages hope. And it gives us more hope when we talk about it. And the one thing that I've really come to appreciate and that we need to understand is that hope is durable. It's a part of the human experience and it doesn't go away. In fact, even in very desperate times, people still have hope. And it's true even for people who are very sick and even for people who are very close to the end of life. They still have hope. But what they hope for changes. And if we talk about it, we can really encourage hope and use the opportunity that is still available to us. In fact, hope is so important that if I ask someone what they hope for and they say they have no hope, I worry that they're depressed, because hopelessness is a sign of depression and serious illness. And it can be treated and made better. Depression is not normal for people who are seriously ill, even those who are very close to the end of life. It's abnormal, and it can respond to treatment. So what is it that people hope for when they're seriously ill? Well, they hope for many things. Obviously, they hope for cure. I think first and foremost, people hope for cure. But in addition, people hope for healing, even when there is no cure. People hope for comfort in the face of suffering. And they hope for all the things that can be despite the things that can't be. So what does that mean? Let me give you an example. We're taking care of a woman in our ICU. She had something called interstitial lung disease. That is, what is that? That's a scarring of the lungs. We don't really know what happens. Many things can cause it, but it's a very progressive, serious scarring of the lungs that makes you short of breath over time. And then over the course of about 2 years or so, your lungs are so scarred that they can't keep you alive anymore. It's a very serious and progressive illness for which there is no cure. She was in our ICU because she had developed pneumonia, and she needed so much oxygen that we couldn't deliver it anywhere except in the ICU. She was receiving what's called high-flow oxygen, very high levels, special mass, special equipment that she couldn't receive elsewhere. One morning on rounds, I said, she's not doing very well. We have to go in and ask her what she hopes for. And the ICU team looked and said, well, that seems wrong. That seems kind of cruel to ask that. Well, if we don't ask, we won't know. And we need to know. So we went in and I asked, said, when you look to the future, what do you hope will happen? She said, well, my daughter's getting married in 10 months in the Napa Valley, and I want to be at her wedding. I said, well, that's really important. And immediately I thought, I don't think she's going to live for 10 months. And I don't think she's going to get out of her ICU to go to Napa. So we talked about it as a team. We talked with the patient and her daughter said, well, that's fine. I'll just get married right here in the ICU. We said, all right, you can do that. A couple of days later, she came in with a beautiful white wedding gown, and her fiance was wearing a tuxedo. They put a corsage on the patient's hospital gown. Family, all the nurses and doctors were around the bed in the ICU. Not a dry eye in the house. It was beautiful. It was not what she had anticipated. It was not the Napa Valley, that's for sure. But it was beautiful. And she got to participate in the things she hoped for because we asked. Because we had the courage to ask what was important and what she hoped for. And rather than taking away hope, we were able to encourage it. And it's too easy in that time to say, oh, you're right, let's not ask because it's going to be uncomfortable. Or if you ask and she says, well, I hope to see my daughter get married, to say, yeah, you know what? Me too. And she'll go away thinking, yeah, I said what was important. They said sure. And so the doctor thinks I'm going to make it. And of course, when it's too late, when it's obvious that she's not, it's then too late. We have to have the courage to talk about hope. And if we have the courage to talk about hope, we can encourage it, of what's most important, and to spend time the way that matters the most. So the way to talk about this and to raise this issue, I call it the golden questions. Golden because I find them so useful and so helpful, both as a doctor, but also for patients and families to talk about it themselves. And the golden questions sound like this. When you think about the future, what do you hope for? When you think about what lies ahead, what worries you the most? What we hope for are the things we want to have happen. See my daughter get married. The things we worry about are the things we want to avoid. I don't want to end up in a nursing home. I'm worried that I won't recognize my family. I worry that I won't be able to take care of myself. These are things that we worry about. And by talking about these, we can help make sure that we achieve the things we most hope for and we avoid the things that we most worry about. And so I encourage you to ask these questions. Ask them of yourself. Ask them of your loved ones. In my book, I call these discussions the gift. One of my colleagues, Rebecca Sudori, earlier today was talking to people about their advance directives and about writing these things down. And I talk about that as the gift that we give our loved ones, because it lets them know what's important to us, what it is we really do hope for and worry about, so that it's easier for them to help us if we can't speak on our own behalf. So what are the most important issues? What do people hope for and worry about? Well, this was a survey done by the California Healthcare Foundation in 2011 asking Californians this very question. What are the most important issues at the end of life? And what they said was making sure my family is not burdened financially by my care. That was the biggest concern, financial concerns. And it's a good concern. The number one cause of bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy in the United States, is healthcare costs. Being comfortable and without pain. Being at peace spiritually. Making sure my family is not burdened by tough decisions about my care. These are the things that we think about, worry about, care about as we face serious illness. These are the things we talk about. This is why we have a chaplain on our team. It's why we have social workers and nurses on our team, so we can really address all these issues. What's interesting is if you look at this, living as long as possible was only endorsed by 36% of people. Which is not to say it's unimportant, it's just not the most important thing. And it's not the most important thing to the most people. But if you look at our healthcare system, you might say that's the only thing that's important, is how do we keep people alive as long as possible? But we know that there are things that are more important, and the way that we achieve them is by talking about them and knowing about them. So the myth is that somehow talking about what's going on will destroy hope, and I would say the truth is that talking about hope encourages it. So what's the third myth? The third myth is that somehow the goal in all of this is to have a good death. That that's what our goal is. And I would say that the truth is that the goal is to live a good life. That really our journey is about how we live life. And that we hope that at the end of a life well lived, we will have a peaceful, calm, comfortable, dignified death. But that's not the goal of healthcare, and that is certainly not the goal of people with serious illness. One of my colleagues likes to say, the only good death is someone else's. And I think that's right. My experience of people who are sick is that they don't want to talk about a good death. They want to talk about a good life, and how am I going to live well and long. I took care of a woman who was 102 years old when she came to the hospital. 2 weeks before coming to the hospital, she bought a new car that she was driving. And she was very proud. She bought a Prius. And she was really proud that she had this kind of ecologically sound car. And she was driving it around San Francisco. She was having lunch with her family, and she collapsed right at the dining room table. So they called 911, not knowing what had happened. They brought her to the hospital, and they did a CT scan of her head to see what happened. And it turned out she had a massive stroke, bleeding in the brain that was not going to be survivable. By that point, she wasn't breathing well, so she had a tube in her throat and she was on a ventilator. And I was called as the palliative care doctor. Our team was called in to come and help take care of this patient. And we went in there. It's very sad. and her family was there. I said, I'm so sorry this happened. Can you tell us about her? And this is when they shared this story. How were you hoping we could help? And they said, look, she lived a good long life, and she did not want to be on machines. So can you just stop the machines and let her go peacefully? I said, yep, we can do that, absolutely. And we know how to do it so that it's peaceful. They said, okay. And I thought to myself, that's about as good as it gets. You live to be 102, you're completely mentally fit, you're still driving and buying your own car, you're eating lunch with your family in your own home. How does it get better than that? And then you die in a moment. You don't even know you're sick. How does it get better than that? I think the only thing maybe better than that is you die while you're asleep. A lot of people tell me that. I like to die in my sleep, which I think might be better. I think it's a little creepy for the person who wakes up in the bed next to you. I think that's a little bit weird, but I think you can get over that. But what struck me in that room was how much sadness and grief and loss there was. And while we might argue that that was kind of the best death you can imagine, it wasn't good because there was a lot of sadness. And that's why I don't like to talk about a good death, but rather a good life. It was peaceful, it was comfortable, it was dignified, and that should be our goal. But in thinking about serious illness, we should be thinking about how to live a good life and what it takes to live a good life. I do want you to imagine for a moment the end of your life. Just imagine it for a moment. Who are you with? What is it like? What's happening? Okay, so how many people had this image in mind? Anyone had this image? The ICU? No? Yeah, not surprising. We don't imagine this for ourselves, but 1/3 of Americans will die in a hospital. 25% will die in the hospital during a stay that includes time in the intensive care unit. But nobody wants this. So why does this happen? Well, it happens for some legitimate reasons. We get acutely ill, like our patient that I just told you about. She was 102 and she suddenly collapsed. We don't know what's going on. Is it fixable? Maybe it was. It wasn't, and so she was in the ICU. She died in our ICU. We were able to take her off the ventilator. She died very peacefully with her family at the bedside. But for many people, you see it coming from a mile away. And if you don't express your preferences about the kind of care you want, you may very well end up this way. And it happens too often because we don't talk about what's most important. We don't talk about the fact that what we want is quality of life, and how do we define it. And I want to share with you just a brief reading from my book. This is a little story about my grandmother, my Safta, and how she thought about this issue. My Safta used to sign birthday cards with the wish that you should live to 120. Because Moses lived to 120 years, and a traditional birthday wish is that you should have a long life like Moses, the greatest teacher and leader of the Jewish people. But as she got older, my grandmother changed it just a bit. In Hebrew, she switched just one letter, and the change in meaning was profound. Rather than writing, live to 120, she wrote, live to 100 like 20. Live long and live well. My Safta understood that a good life is even more important than a long life. She lived that saying and declined chemotherapy when she developed lung cancer at age 93. Not all of us will live that long, but we can all live that essence of that saying by living well. That's one of the challenges we face, is how do we live well? And my message to you is that we can live well, and that hopefully at the end of a good life, lived well, we do have a peaceful end. And I showed this image of the airplane landing just to remind us that, yeah, at the end of the day, the plane will have to land. All of our planes have to land. But the goal is to land softly. Too often in modern medicine in the United States, we forget that the plane has to land, and we imagine we'll just keep it aloft, and we keep flying around, and the fuel gauge is going down, and we're flying around, and one of the engine gives out, and we fly around, and then we run out of fuel, and the plane crashes on the ground, and there's a lot of debris and a lot of damage. better to recognize the flight has to land, where is it going to land, and how is it going to land. And I want to show you this slide. This is a painting called The Doctor. It was painted in 1898 by Sir Luke Fields. This painting hangs in the Tate Britain Gallery in London. It's a very large painting. It's probably bigger than this projection, actually. And it's sort of the iconic picture of the physician. Sir Luke Fields got a commission to paint anything he wanted, and he painted this in honor of the doctor who took care of his son. But his son died. This was not because the doctor saved his son's life, because frankly, there wasn't a lot doctors could do back then. 1898, there wasn't a lot. But it's a respectful picture, and it could be the nurse, it could be a social worker, a chaplain at the bedside. It happens to be a doctor. But there's something very important going on here. The doctor is at the bedside with the patient. And it's easy in our technological age to forget how important that is, and even to be challenged in trying to develop this. But we want to remember that, particularly in the face of serious illness, the relationship that we have with doctors and nurses, in addition to the relationships we have with our loved ones, matters tremendously in getting good care and to feeling healed and to finding comfort and healing in the face of serious illness. And in palliative care, we think a lot about this, about being at the bedside and how we can help our patients when we are with them. So to wrap up, I'm going to show you this picture. This is the view out of one of our comfort care suites, the rooms that we have for people at UCSF who are at the end of life and who, for whatever reason, do need to be in the hospital. Sometimes that is important because that's the only place you can get the care that you need. Looking out east towards San Francisco. So what are the myths? The myth is that somehow you have to choose quantity or quality of life. And I want you to know that you can get both. You can have both, and palliative care will help you do it. Talking about hope will encourage it, not take it away. And then finally, our goal is to live a good life in the face of serious illness and to know that it can be done. The good news is that our healthcare system is changing. More and more palliative care is available. I think in San Francisco, we are blessed to have lots of palliative care services, wonderful hospices, palliative care services in every hospital in our city, and many outpatient and home-based palliative care programs. And if you go to your doctor or your loved one has a serious illness and you ask for palliative care, what you might still hear from your doctor is, "Oh, you're not ready." But what you should tell your doctor is, "Thank you. I appreciate that. I really want to see a palliative care team. I understand what palliative care is, and I'd like to see one." And to make sure that you get the care you want, which will actually be the best care that you can get. At the end of the day, what we want is to have good care and demonstrate that caring for each other within our society and within our healthcare system. Because in the face of serious illness, that is what matters most. How we care for each other and how we know through our actions and our words that we're cared for. And so I'm going to finish by giving you a quiz about caring. Did they tell you you'd get a quiz? They didn't tell you that? Okay, well, here you go. But I'm giving you the easiest quiz you've ever had for two reasons. One, you don't have to write anything down. And two, I'm not going to grade you. So I'm really giving you really the easiest quiz. So all you have to do is follow along. Okay. Name the 5 wealthiest people in the world. Name the last 5 Heisman Trophy winners. Name 10 people who have won the Nobel or Pulitzer Prize. Name the last half dozen Academy Award winners for Best Actor and Actress. Name the last decade's worth of World Series winners. Okay, how'd you do? Terrible, right? Yeah. Okay, right. The point is that none of us remembers the headliners of yesterday. But think about it. These are no second-rate achievers. These people are the best in their fields. But the applause dies, awards tarnish, achievements are forgotten. Okay, now I'm going to give you another quiz. See how you do on this one. List a few teachers who aided your journey through school. Name 3 friends who have helped you through difficult times. Name 5 people who have taught you something worthwhile. Think of a few people who have made you feel appreciated. Name half a dozen heroes whose stories have inspired you. Easier? Sure. The lesson. The people who make a difference in our lives are not the ones with the most money, the most credentials, or the most awards. They're the ones who care. Thank you all very much. Thanks. We do have time for questions, comments? Yes, please. You're welcome.
Really warm and generous and informative talk.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm interested in something that came up. I'm involved in home death care and how care gets given. Is there an issue in hospitals right now, any power struggle around the palliative care coming in an ICU? You know, is that working pretty well in your hospital?
Yeah, great question. So first, thank you for the comment. So is there some struggle between palliative care and like ICU care or other kind of specialty care? I would say by and large, for example, at UCSF Medical Center, I would say we have really wonderful relationships with our colleagues in all fields. But you know, we started back in 1999. So we've been going a long time, and so people have gotten time to get used to this idea. As I said, some doctors still say, you know, you're not ready for palliative care. Sometimes what they mean is you're not dying today. And my point to you is you don't have to be dying to get palliative care. You just need to have a serious illness to benefit from it. I think that's one important point. I think some doctors still misunderstand what palliative care is, so that's why I want you to be ready to respond. And I think some doctors just feel a lot of grief over their patients not doing well. And admitting that they're not doing well is very hard because maybe they've been taking care of you for years or decades and now you're not doing well and their treatments are not helping. And a lot of doctors feel like the patient is a relative. They feel love for their patient. The challenge, of course, is that there's many ways to love someone, and chemotherapy is not always the way someone needs to be loved. So we have to have many other ways to show and express our love. And that's part of the teaching that we do, and a large part of the work that we do is teaching about palliative care to give people many ways to demonstrate the caring and the love. Yes, please.
First, it was a terrific talk.
Thank you.
Can you do me a favor and pronounce your last name?
Yeah, my last name is Pantilat.
Pantilat.
Yep.
Thank you. And I came in here before people came in and to introduce myself and said I was dreading your talk.
You did.
I was wrong. And you said it. You didn't think I would.
Yes.
And I didn't. So it was so moving.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And just for the recording, the comment was that we had spoken before my talk, and I think it's Karen, right? Yes. And Karen said, "I'm really dreading your talk." And I said, "No, I think you'll be inspired." And you didn't quite say that, but I'll say it for you. Thank you for that. I think this is not easy to talk about. I'm not pretending that this is easy to talk about, but it's really important to talk about. Because there can be a lot of hope and there can be a lot of joy, even when people are sick. So just as another example, my grandfather also had lung cancer, and he received hospice services. He had about 6 months between diagnosis and death, never spent a day in the hospital. When he and my grandmother moved to a new apartment in Denver, my grandmother really wanted an apartment with 2 bathrooms. And my grandfather was very practical and very frugal. And he said, look, there's just 2 of us. We really do not need 2 bathrooms. I mean, really, the guests can just use our bathroom. And of course, he won. So as he got sicker, though, and he was in hospice services, he got to the point where it was really hard for him to get out of bed. And so they brought a bedside commode. So they delivered the bedside commode. And my grandfather looks at my grandmother and says, you see, Manya, now we have the second bathroom you always wanted. So I think there can still be humor and joy, even in what was really a very sad situation. Did you have another comment? Sorry.
Well, I did have another comment, and it was triggered by your talking about the disappointment of doctors who treated patients for maybe a decade.
Right.
To be able to acknowledge that there are points when one is helpless.
Yeah.
Which is a
Yes. Yes. So I think the comment is, from a doctor's perspective, how do you acknowledge that you can't treat the illness any further? You don't have more treatments. And I think that's really important. One of the things I talk about when I teach is exactly that point. What doctors will say is, I'm really sorry, there's nothing more we can do. And I tell them not to say that. That, you can't say that. Because one, it's not true. There's always something to do. Yes, we may not be able to cure your illness or even slow it down anymore. That does happen. I mean, that is the reality of medicine and biology. But it's never true that there's nothing we can do. There's always something we can do to help you feel better, to make you feel not alone, to help you with the things you hope for. So this is when what I teach my students is, don't say that. You can say, I wish there was something we could do for the illness, for your cancer. Unfortunately, there's not. Let's talk about what we can do to help you feel better and to recognize that there's always something that can be done to make things better. And that's an important place to put our focus. And it allows all of us to do something that's meaningful and helpful. Yes, please. The 15% who leave hospice? Yeah. So can I elaborate on the 15% who leave hospice? Sure. So lots of things happen. So to enroll in hospice, the doctor has to be willing to say that you have a 6-month prognosis or less. So that's the rule about enrollment in hospice. But there's no rules about how long you can stay in hospice. You can stay in hospice for a year or 2. But the other rule is you have to decline. You have to just keep declining. Every 6 months to sort of recertify, what's called recertify hospice, you just have to demonstrate decline. And, for some people, they stabilize. People with dementia, people with cancer, people with heart failure, with emphysema. They have a period where they're much sicker, but then through care, they stabilize and are not declining. I think the challenge for those, so that's the good news, right? The good news is, hey, you get to graduate. The bad news is that you don't have the hospice services coming home to help you that may have been the reason why you stabilized in the first place. And so many of our hospices are trying to figure out how do we still take care of you and provide these important services even though you don't technically qualify for hospice. And we've been working with many of our hospice partners to bring palliative care to the home for people who still need that kind of care. You're welcome. Yes, please, Barbara. Thank you.
And this, I think, follows on that last comment. One of the biggest economic challenges in the healthcare system to have the kind of concurrent palliative care that's your vision?
Yeah, so the question is, what are the financial challenges in the healthcare system that get in the way of getting this palliative care along with your curative care? The biggest challenge is that we tend to historically pay for care by the thing you do. So you see a patient, they pay you. You do an operation, they pay you. It's called fee for service. You do a service and you get paid. And the challenge, of course, for palliative care is that, first of all, we function as a team. So while the doctor gets paid for the work they do, social workers, chaplains, nurses have a harder time doing that. And so it's hard to really provide the whole range of services. The second thing we realize is that this care is not a 5-minute visit. You can't figure this all out quickly and run through them in 15-minute visits. In our clinic, our new patient visits are an hour. Our follow-ups are 30 minutes. So it takes time to do this work well. And so paying it by the visit doesn't work very well. And I think that's been the biggest challenge. I think what we're seeing, though, as we move and as our health system evolves into accountable care organizations and other types of systems where we really put the focus on value, on better quality for the same cost. I think that's really where I'm very optimistic about palliative care and about the growth of palliative care. Because if you look at how do we make care better for people in a way that doesn't actually cost more and may in fact cost less, palliative care is one of those solutions because you can get a lot of palliative care at home for 1 day in the ICU. And if you never wanted to be in the ICU to begin with, 4, 5, 10 days in the ICU can give us a lot of services that people actually do want. think the other thing we have to think about, and I just heard a talk about this, about social determinants of health, is to recognize that the other thing that helps people live well and be in their homes are social services. Meals on Wheels, visiting nurses, caregivers in the home, transportation. Can't tell you how many of people we take care of end up in nursing homes and skilled nursing because they don't have the caregiving they need, or they can't get the food they need, or the transportation they need. The United States is alone among developed countries in spending more money on health care than we do on social services, by a lot. Every other developed country spends more money on social services than on health. And what you see, in fact, are better health outcomes where we spend more money on social services. That takes a big change in our society and our healthcare system and how we allocate funds, but there is a tremendous role there, both within the healthcare system and in our society at large, to really think about how we provide those social services that really make it possible for people to live the life they want in the place they want to be. Yes, maybe the last question, please.
I was wondering, usually they only offer you chemo or radiation, but Stanford offers the immunotherapy, and I'm wondering when is the other people going to be able to get this into all the hospitals, because I don't believe in those other things. Your own system, working for you. When will they have that available? You think at all the hospitals?
Yeah, well, I know you can get it at UCSF. You don't have to drive all the way to Stanford, although that's a good place too, apparently. Honestly, I don't know. I think you will be able to find immunotherapy widely. Immunotherapy is really a tremendous advance and really a wonderful advance. So is targeted chemotherapy, a wonderful advance. And when it works, it is really fantastic. It unfortunately doesn't work everywhere, but I think it really has opened up a whole new way of looking at illness and how to treat it. And I think it's really wonderful, and I'm excited about it, and I hope that, one day we'll get rid of cancer. That would be really great. My wife said that when she saw President Obama in his State of the Union. She said, they're going to have this cancer moonshot. What if they get rid of cancer? What are you going to do? I'm like, we're good. In palliative care, we're going to help people with serious illness live well. I have a job. I'm worried about my oncology colleagues. If cancer goes away with some pill, they're going to be in trouble, but palliative care, I think, is going to be okay because regardless of what we do, taking good care of people with serious illness is still going to be important. So, yeah, I think definitely worth thinking about all the possible treatments that can help people feel better. And I think the role of palliative care is not to say no to those things. It's really to say yes where it's really the right thing that helps people feel better. And because there are side effects, to think about how can we help you feel as well as possible while you're going through treatment. You're welcome. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.